Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, anyways, I thought that I would review this little video that I personally thought would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video that I'm going to review by the boxing channel known as Boxing Ego. And a lot of the times when I end up reviewing a video like this from Boxing Ego or from the LDBC or new media, usually 9 times out of 10, it's because I disagree with some sort of narrative. And let me also tell you this, because a lot of people that may go on my channel, they may just think that I'm out here trying to attack the LDBC or new media when I'm really not. Now, don't get me wrong, I disagree with a lot of their tactics. I disagree with a lot of the narratives that they try to push. But by no means am I saying that ESPN and Ring Magazine and a lot of the other media outlets are completely reliable, because a lot of the times they're not. A lot of the times, even the mainstream media outlets, not even just these YouTube channels, they're also very fanatical and they cannot really be relied upon for their logic and their objectivity. It just is what it is. Because a lot of the times, especially when you have major fans overall in charge of overall certain debates, a lot of the times it can get exactly what I just mentioned, very fanatical. And certain fans overall, because they're so obsessed usually with loving or hating certain athletes, they're not going to be very logical and objective. And if you're not logical, you're not objective, and you let your emotions get in the stir of things, then you really can't be relied upon for an objective and logical analysis. It just is what it is. But anyways, before we really get into the video, I'm going to be doing a lot of explaining, at least for my introduction, or at least maybe about a 5 to 10 minute introduction, because I thought that I would talk about, in my view, what mainly this video is going to be about. And this is mainly going to be about the Vasyl Lomachenko versus Devin Haney topic, and overall who potentially is going to win the fight, and in my opinion, overall what this fight means for both of their careers, especially for Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko. Now, a lot of people overall that are either new or have been around my channel for a very long time, I always get this question quite rapidly, and I use the term decently great quite a lot. And a lot of people always get confused when I use that term, and it's understandable because it seems a little bit contradictory. It seems a little bit, hypocritical almost when it comes down to it, or at least, a little bit contradictory at the end of the day. But what I mean by a decently great fighter is a fighter that, in my opinion, overall is a guy that or a gal that ended up achieving certain great things in their career, but you wouldn't necessarily call them an all-time great fighter. And I don't think that overall there's any better fighters that really fit that fold than certain fighters like Terrence Bud Crawford, Vasyl Lomachenko, Naoya Inoue, Jermell Charlo when it comes down to it, and right now probably a Devin Haney and a Shakur Stevenson. And even if you want to put other fighters maybe in that mold, maybe a Deontay Wilder, maybe a fighter overall. Like, even if you want to put an Alexander Usyk there, I don't know quite yet if I would say that Alexander Usyk is an all-time great fighter, but I'm confident enough because of what he's already achieved and that great win that he had over Anthony Joshua on 2 separate occasions, as dominant as what he did. I can at least be very confident in giving Usyk the claim of great fighter. Certain fighters, in my opinion, like a Tyson Fury, certain fighters like a Usyk and a Canelo Alvarez, those are fighters that, in my opinion, they're pretty much stuck with the label of great because they have beyond proven to me that they can do what they need to do, even against certain odds when they're stacked against them, at least in certain fights. And don't get me wrong, Lomachenko and some of the other fighters that I mentioned overall, they've been able to do that as well, but maybe not quite on the level that I've seen some of those other fighters do it, and maybe some of you disagree, but it just is what it is. But Lomachenko, in my opinion, at least when we really talk about his career, I think that he is clearly going to be a Hall of Famer. Now, of course, a lot of people would say, well, that's not really that big of a deal. There's a lot of boxers that have made the Hall of Fame or are going to make the Hall of Fame, and they really are not that great of fighters. Yes, but I think it's very clear that Lomachenko, that you very clearly overall could rank him as a great fighter. I don't think that there's any doubt about that. Now, if he does end up losing this fight to Devin Haney and ends up maybe losing a couple of others, his career is not really going to be remembered upon as a Floyd Mayweather Jr. career or, a Manny Pacquiao career or anything like that, of course. And on top of that, he's a European fighter. They don't tend to get quite as much promotion, at least at times. They do on the pound for pound list, but in terms of marketing them overall, not quite as much, or, they maybe don't get quite as much sales. It just is what it is. But Lomachenko, if he does end up losing this Devin Haney fight, and if his career ends up a little bit kind of like a Guillermo Rigondeaux, to where he did win some very big fights in his career, but he ended up losing some of the other ones in the latter part of his career, he's going to be remembered as a decently great fighter. And I don't think that there's any better way to describe his career, at least at the current moment in time. Lomachenko, at least in my opinion, he might be the greatest, decently great fighter that I've personally ever seen. And once again, to a lot of people, that's not going to make sense. But let me overall give you certain examples. Decently great fighters, in my opinion, when you talk about decently great fighters, fighters that clearly had great talent or great ability, or maybe were on the great level, but you can't necessarily quite put them into the realm overall of all-time great. Those are certain fighters like a Riddick Bowe. Those are maybe certain fighters overall. If I were to maybe think of another one, I don't know. I'm trying to really think of another one at the current moment in time. I don't know. Maybe if I were to think of another one, I'm trying to think maybe a Marco Antonio Barrera, or maybe someone like a Eric Morales. Now, some of you may say, well, hold the phone. Why would you call those guys just decently great fighters? Why wouldn't you call them all-time great fighters? Well, in a way, in my view, they are all-time great fighters, but they also ended up losing to Manny Pacquiao. They also ended up losing a multitude of other fights in their career. So that's basically what my point is. Vasyl Lomachenko is somewhat along those lines. Lomachenko has clearly won some of the bigger fights in his career. He was able to beat Gary Russell Jr. He was able to beat Guillermo El Chacal Rigondeaux. He was able to beat Jorge Linares. He was able to beat Nicholas Walters. In fact, he was able to embarrass most of those guys. But the biggest fight of his career, in my opinion, the fight that I truly thought that he could have potentially lost against Teofimo Lopez, he did end up losing that fight. And not only did he end up losing that fight, I thought that he ended up losing it, a little bit more clearly. I wouldn't say that it's the worst loss that I've ever seen, but clearly Lomachenko was not comfortable in that fight. And clearly, all in all, he let Teofimo Lopez overall take it to him in that fight. He did not have a great game plan in that fight, and it cost him the decision. It just is what it is, and he rightfully lost that fight. So the question is now about Vasyl Lomachenko is this. Is he actually going to win this fight against the Devin Haney? Because Vasyl Lomachenko, of course, as we have seen, he has had a little bit of problems at the 135-pound weight division. And listen, that's just going to happen. Lomachenko is a guy that really should be fighting at 130 pounds, maybe even 126 pounds. On top of that, he is a guy overall that has a 65-inch reach. That's pretty abnormally small for a guy overall that is 5'8", even for a guy that is only 5'7" or 5'8". And a lot of people, of course, talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao, the way that they were able to move up the weight divisions, right? But those are different levels of standards. When you talk about Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr., you're talking about two of the fighters that could be debated as the greatest fighters of all time. And when you talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr., there was something that he had that Lomachenko and a lot of other fighters that are moving up the weight divisions that they did not have. Because when Floyd Mayweather Jr. was in the ring against every fighter, usually he outreached them in terms of his arm reach. He had a 72-inch reach for a 5'8" fighter, which is a pretty extraordinary reach. It's a pretty extraordinary reach. Floyd Mayweather Jr. had a longer reach than what certain overall super middleweights or light heavyweights had. So Floyd Mayweather Jr. had a certain advantage that a lot of these other fighters did not have. Now, is that to discredit Floyd Mayweather Jr. in any way? No, it's not. And in terms of Manny Pacquiao, he had the great athleticism when it comes down to it, the great power, and probably a little bit of help, maybe behind the scenes, if you know what I'm alleging at, but it just is what it is, of course. But there's a lot of fighters that are probably on something, but it is what it is. But the big question is this. Is Vasyl Lomachenko maybe one day going to be graceful, maybe in that conversation? Or maybe is he going to be slightly below them? Is he going to be in the same conversation maybe as an Andre Ward, a Canelo Alvarez? Is he going to be maybe in the same conversation as a Sugar Ray Leonard, a Bernard Hopkins? And not all these same fighters that I'm mentioning are all in the same league, but all these fighters that I'm mentioning are at least within my top 30 of all time. Is Lomachenko there at the current moment in time? In my opinion, no, he isn't. Does that mean that he can't get there? No, it doesn't mean that. But what Lomachenko, in my opinion, is going to have to do, he's going to have to get some astronomical wins, in my opinion, at the end point of his career. And if it isn't over Devin Haney, he's going to have to defeat someone like a Shakur Stevenson or Gervonta Tank Davis, if not both of those fighters, to be remembered probably as an all-time great fighter. And that's what I mean by that. But anyways, we're going to see what Mr. Boxing Eagle overall had to say, because the former challenger for Vasyl Lomachenko in his most recent fight, Mr. Jermaine Ortiz, he stated that he personally believes that Devin Haney will beat Lomachenko. And in my personal opinion, I tend to agree with him. And once again, I will explain my points why. But anyways, we're going to talk about it in the video. Let's get into it. Let's see what he has to say.
Devin Haney is favored if he is to fight Lomachenko, and that's from Lomachenko's last opponent, Jermaine Ortiz. That's what I want to talk about in this video. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. So it looks like Fight Hype has an interview with Jermaine Ortiz. In case you guys aren't in the know, Jermaine Ortiz was Vasyl Lomachenko's last opponent. This is what he said when he was basically asked about Lomachenko and the scorecards from his fight with Lomachenko. He says, when I heard the scorecards, I'm like, I got it. So he was clearly surprised that he lost to Lomachenko. He also says, quote, I would love a rematch. If he would give me a rematch, I think it would be a more interesting fight for the fans than a possible fight with Lomachenko versus Devin Haney. That would be more interesting for the fans. If they really feel that I won, let's run it back and let's see if he can win in a dominating fashion.
You know, Jermaine Ortiz allegedly says that he personally believes that he won that fight. But you can tell the way that Jermaine Ortiz is talking that he really doesn't truly believe that he won that fight. And certain people may say, well, how do you know? When a fighter truly believes that they got robbed, there really overall is no second guessing about it. But when you have these certain fighters like Austin Trout after he fought Canelo Alvarez or Jermaine Ortiz after he fought Lomachenko, you always notice that there's certain contradictory statements or certain statements that they make that really don't make any sense. You know, he says that he clearly thought that he won, but, well, you know, let's have the fight if you guys truly believe that I won. And you're going to see some other statements that seem a little bit contradictory. And even Ego realizes that overall in some of his statements.
Or if I can get a win in a dominating fashion. I know if I were to face him again, I would take him out. I wouldn't let it go.
Well, no, you wouldn't, Jermaine Ortiz. You would try to take Lomachenko out, but you can't take Lomachenko out. Because it's no offense against Jermaine Ortiz. He's a very, 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 very decently talented contender. But he's not enough overall for a Vasyl Lomachenko. To beat someone like a Vasyl Lomachenko, in my opinion, not only do you have to be clearly an A-grade fighter, but more than likely, you're going to have to be very decently athletic, like that of a Teofimo Lopez or a Devin Haney. And you're probably also going to have a decent size advantage over him. Let's just be real. It is what it is.
To decision. And then regarding Devin Haney fighting Lomachenko, this is what Ortiz had to say. He says, quote, I'm probably going to favor Devin Haney, but we'll see. I hear a lot of people saying they feel that Lomachenko will give him a fight. I just feel from his performance and watching how he has a good jab and how I dominated Lomachenko with just basically my jab and controlling him, I feel like he'll probably do the
Well, you didn't really dominate him with the jab, Mr. Ortiz, because if you dominated Lomachenko with the jab, you would have won the fight. But it is what it is.
same and keep him at bay. I feel like Lomachenko is too small for the lightweight division, and Devin Haney would be too strong for him.
And I agree with both of those statements. It's very clear that Lomachenko is not a natural 135-pounder, and I've been saying this overall for a very long time. The LDBC and new media, of course, have been trying to go against that narrative because they want to make you believe that a lot of people are making excuses just because they're saying that it's clear that Lomachenko is too small for that division. It's not an excuse. Now, if you want to say overall that Lomachenko, that he should be putting on, you know, somewhat of better performances like against Teofimo Lopez or Jermaine Ortiz, that's not something overall that is a bad thing to say. That's valid. But to say that overall that Lomachenko clearly is a, you know, true natural 135-pounder, no, he's not a true natural 135-pounder. You can tell every opponent that he's ever fought at 135 pounds has been lengthier and has been bigger than him. It just is what it is.
Be a repeat of me and his fight. To me, the fight went how the sparring went. And he's comparing it to when he sparred Lomachenko. He says, I wasn't fatigued at all. I think that's where I effed up. He says, in the championship rounds, he should put his foot on the gas. I should have never thought like that, to think like that, but I really felt good and confident.
So apparently you believe that you won the fight, but then at the same time you said, well, that's where I fucked up. I overall didn't put on the pace. Once again, does that sound like a fighter that truly believes that they won the fight? I'm not so sure about that.
That I had a lot of rounds in the bag. I thought they were clear, and at least when I was in the ring. But yeah, fatigue was not one of the issues at all. I wasn't surprised by it because I knew that that was going to happen.
Well, obviously fatigue was a little bit of the problem, and that's not me saying that Jermaine Ortiz has a very bad gas tank. But Lomachenko has one of the best gas tanks that I've personally ever seen. And in my opinion, it didn't really look that great in the fight. It didn't really look that good against Jermaine Ortiz. Now, that could have been because Lomachenko was off for a year. It also could be because overall soon enough he's going to be 35 years old. And Lomachenko has a type of boxing style that is not really going to last him until he's 42 years old. Of course, you have certain guys overall, like I watch certain videos, they talk about, they say, oh, well, Floyd Mayweather Jr., he lasted till overall, he beat Canelo when he was 36, right? But Floyd Mayweather Jr. not only took care of his body very, very well, but Floyd Mayweather Jr. overall did not exert the amount overall the pressure on his body as what a Vasyl Lomachenko does. Lomachenko is primarily an offensive fighter. And when you have someone that is primarily an offensive fighter and puts on the type of pace that he does overall, and some of you can maybe blame that on him, some of you maybe not, but keep in mind Lomachenko is mainly going to have to put on the pace a little bit more than the average fighter because he's always going to be a guy usually that's going to be outreached, especially in the higher weight divisions. He's not a guy like a Floyd Mayweather Jr. that has a 72-inch reach and can fight a little bit more defensive and maybe sit back and counter him overall the same way that a Floyd could, because usually he's going to be outreached by a multitude of inches. So Lomachenko is going to have to get in there. He's going to have to move a little bit extra than that of the average fighter, and he's also going to have to put on the pace. And that's why, in my opinion, I don't know if I see him beating Devin Haney. It's not that Lomachenko, in my opinion, that he doesn't put on a great pace, but in my opinion, I don't know if he can put on the type of pace that he needs to beat that of a Devin Haney. And I think that Devin Haney will put on a type of pace overall that more than likely will keep Lomachenko at bay. Not only that, but Devin Haney is a guy that is clearly bigger than Lomachenko. He's probably about 2 weight classes bigger than Lomachenko. He is a guy that probably should be a natural 140-pounder. He has about a 7-inch reach advantage over him. And on top of that, he's very decently talented. Now, I think that there's a lot of categories, or at least certain categories, that Lomachenko is better than Devin Haney in. And I've said that before, and I had certain guys that got personally offended when I said that, or they got annoyed. It's nothing to really get annoyed about. When you take a look at Felix Tito Trinidad against Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker, Felix Tito Trinidad, I believe, was able to beat Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker by unanimous decision. Do I personally believe that Felix Tito Trinidad is a greater or a more skilled fighter than Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker? Not at all. But there was just certain things, including with the size and the power, that Felix Tito Trinidad was able to take advantage of, similar with Oscar De La Hoya. Even though that fight, in my opinion, it could have been argued that Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker could have won the fight. It also could have been argued for Oscar. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, Lomachenko is probably the more skilled of the two fighters. But Devin Haney is able to do something that Lomachenko is not able to do, at least at 135 pounds. And that's really put the type of pace that he needs to on these type of fighters. Lomachenko very clearly has a little bit more of a difficult time at 135 pounds because of that, because of his size disadvantage. It just is what it is. And once again, he's about to turn 35 years old, I believe, in February. So once again, his type of style is not meant to last for the long term. So Lomachenko, once again, if he is going to be remembered as an all-time great fighter and get upgraded once again from my status of decently great fighter, he is going to have to either beat Devin Haney or Shakur Stevenson or Gervonta Tank Davis. He's at least going to have to beat 2 out of the 3 of those guys.
That's why I was so confident and so calm. No, I wasn't surprised. So to me, that's a little bit contradictory, in this.
Exactly, and what that tells me is that Jermaine Ortiz does not truly believe that he 100% won the fight.
Simple fact of, he said he let his foot off the gas, thinking he had rounds in the bag, but then he also said he wasn't surprised that they robbed him in the outcome. Now, I've given you guys my opinion.
Well, they didn't really rob Jermaine Ortiz overall once again in the outcome because it wasn't a robbery. And I've seen robberies. Certain fights that are a robbery are like Yarosani Lara versus Paul Williams, Manny Pacquiao versus Tim Bradley, when they gave Bradley that horrible decision in the first fight. Or certain fights, in my opinion, like a Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 1. Maybe even a Jamel Charlo versus Brian Castano in the first fight. But I don't even think I'll go that far because I could see maybe how that fight was scored a draw. But the Jermaine Ortiz versus Vasyl Lomachenko, of course, a lot of these people, they like to call it a robbery. A lot of people really don't know what a true robbery is. Same thing with Teofimo Lopez and Sandor Martin. That was a very competitive fight that truly could have went either way. And in my opinion, Teofimo, he was the busier fighter. At times, he was landing the more impactful punches, and he was just throwing more. Overall, it was more his pace. So I thought that Teofimo slightly deserved to get the decision. I understand if you argued for Sandor Martin, but none of those fights are really a true robbery. Same with Sergey Kovalev versus Andre Ward and certain other fights overall that we've seen. Canelo versus Gennady Golovkin too. Those are not true robberies. Just because you think a fight could have went either way doesn't necessarily mean that overall that it's 100% controversial or that it's a robbery. A lot of people like to use the term robbery overall with certain fighters that they don't like, but then with certain fighters that they do like, overall, like with the Jamel Charlo and a Boxing Ego. You notice that he won't call the first fight with Brian Gastano controversial, even though it probably was one of the more controversial decisions that I've seen over the past several years.
On the fight, and it hasn't changed. I thought Jermaine Ortiz beat Lomachenko. I thought Lomachenko, it was kind of like the Teofimo Lopez fight where
I agree. I've seen a lot of the same faults in this fight as what I've seen in the Teofimo Lopez fight. Vasily Lomachenko giving up a lot of the earlier rounds. Now, once again, it could be once again that because Vasily Lomachenko was off for a year. Do I personally believe that? No, I don't. Personally, I think that once again, Lomachenko, he very clearly has a difficult time at 135 pounds because he's not a natural 135 pounder. He's not a natural 135 pounder. It's just obvious. He's still a very decently great fighter. He's got a great all around skill set. But with his 65-inch arm reach, it's just very tough to do overall what some other fighters can do because he's already at a little bit of a disadvantage. And on top of that, Lomachenko is not a guy that has an A+ grade chin. Now, is that me saying that he has, a chin made out of glass or that, overall that is made out of tissue paper? No. I think Lomachenko has a good chin, but if you're going to be a guy like Canelo Alvarez and at times compete at light heavyweight and super middleweight and guys that are clearly bigger than you and beat them, you're going to have one of the greatest chins probably of all time. And what you notice about Canelo Alvarez, that boy overall has a chin. I've seen Canelo Alvarez get hard, excuse me, I've seen him overall get hit overall with some of the hardest punches overall in history, with that of a Gennady Golovkin, a Dmitry Bivol overall, even Lara overall when he hit him a little bit. I've seen him overall basically get hit by all those fighters. All right? And Canelo Alvarez, he can take all those punches. I don't know if Vasily Lomachenko has the same type of chin.
he's giving up early rounds, letting the younger, fresher guy kind of get off first and things like that. And then when Lomachenko's up against it, then in the second half, he kind of turned up in little spots. And I've only watched the fight once, but if I'm not mistaken, I think I even gave Jermaine Ortiz the 12th round. And if the judges thought it was a close fight, to me, based on his lackluster performance, especially in the first rounds, where he was clearly getting outboxed and having trouble with Ortiz's size, I do believe that that would have been.
And even Mr. Ego said that he clearly was having trouble with his size. So once again, all these guys that tell you that Lomachenko, that he's truly naturally a 135 pounder, they're all full of shit. They know overall the truth of the matter. Now once again, in my opinion, Lomachenko still is going to have a decently great performance. And if he does not, win against Devin Haney, his career can still somewhat be overall potentially all-time great because I can maybe let the Devin Haney loss slide because he clearly is decently bigger than Lomachenko. But if you still go into the fights against Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Tank Davis, and if you still are not able to win those fights or overall pull out those fights, then in my opinion, the only thing that you'll be remembered as is a decently great fighter.
Needed round.
Unless Devin Haney, of course, pretty much, pushes Lomachenko and basically outboxes him or overall is able to completely knock him out and, basically to smithereens to where he's no longer the same fighter. But once again, Lomachenko's career, once again, is going to be very interesting to really rank after his career is over, depending on what he's further able to accomplish.
That Lomachenko needed to nab. But Devin Haney got in the ring after the Lomachenko fight. You guys know boxing politics. That was the fight that they were trying to make, and it looks like the politics kind of got in the way because I really thought Ortiz won the fight, right? And I don't really see how you can give it to Lomachenko. As far
Well, once again, you basically have been a person that has alleged certain boxing scorecards that more than likely have not been efficient overall, because of certain fighters that you may or may not like. It's very easy to see how Lomachenko ended up winning the fight overall because Lomachenko a lot of the times landed certain blows that almost knocked down Jermaine Ortiz or almost knocked him out, or at least almost knocked him on his ass. There was a lot of rounds to where Lomachenko clearly was coming back and he was landing the more impactful blows. It's really not that hard to see how Jermaine Ortiz lost the fight or how Lomachenko ended up just pulling out the victory.
far as Devin Haney,
But Boxing Ego, of course, claimed that he only seen the fight once. So what that tells me is one of two things, or probably both, is that you don't like Lomachenko that much. So the reason why you're not watching the fight again is because you don't want to relive Lomachenko overall getting the victory because you're disappointed. You were hoping that Jermaine Ortiz was going to get the victory. And two, you don't want to possibly overall get another perspective and potentially rewatch the fight and say, oh, now I can see potentially how people think Lomachenko ended up winning the fight. Because one would think overall that as an analyzer, that you would say, well, you know what? A lot of people potentially thought this was a robbery. I'm going to rewatch it multiple times to truly think overall or to truly see what, in my opinion, was happening here. Because even certain things that you believe that you're very certain about, if there's a mix of opinions overall all over the place, one would think all in all that you're going to give it a multitude of viewings. A very overall, well, at least a little bit ago, probably overall a few weeks ago to a month ago, the Tiafimo versus Sandor Martin fight excuse me, happened. And of course, the first time around, I thought that Teofimo Lopez ended up winning the fight 8 rounds to 2. I didn't really even think it was particularly close. Then the second time around that I watched it, I thought that Sandor Martin won by a point. Then the third time I watched it, I had Teofimo Lopez winning 6 rounds to 4. So that's why it's important to watch even certain fights that you believe are certain, to watch them a multitude of times.
In Lomachenko, I just find the talking points are laughable at this point because me on my channel, I say all of these things and give you my honest opinion. You know, it's not anything against this fighter or this. I get accused of all kinds of it. Oh, you're biased. Oh, you hate Lomachenko or whoever.
Well, both of those things are true. Let's 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 really be real. Let's be honest. If Vasyl Lomachenko ended up winning this fight against Devin Haney, you would not be very happy. And yes, you do hate certain fighters, and at times you are very, very biased. You're biased against certain fighters like a Canelo Alvarez, a Tyson Fury, a Vasyl Lomachenko, right now a Terrence Bud Crawford, and a multitude of other fighters. It just is what it is.
The said fighter is, and I just continue to do my thing and give you my honest opinion, one foot in front of the other, and produce the best commentary in all of boxing, in boxing history, in the digital age. So, Ego Stradamus strikes again. Now it's funny to see that
With what? What necessarily were you correct about? I need to know. Allegedly, Ego Stradamus overall strikes again, but what really overall is going on here? What were you overall predicting 100% correctly? Now, in my opinion, once again, heading into the fight, I believe that Devin Haney is more than likely going to win by unanimous decision. I just personally don't see with some of the effects that Lomachenko has had at the lightweight division. He's obviously not the same weight as some of those guys. I think that he's clearly reached his max limit. He's a guy that's very, very skilled, but he's also a guy that has a very difficult time putting on the pace that he needs to against fighters that are bigger than him, especially at 135. It just is what it is.
all of the people who called Lomachenko, and this is not directed at Ortiz because I never really heard him even do too many interviews about Lomachenko. I'm talking about old media. But it's very funny to see how they praised and hoisted Lomachenko up, said he's the Matrix, said he's high tech, said he's unbeatable. You even had boxing media writing these fluff pieces on Lomachenko, and they seem mesmerized by anything that Lomachenko would do. There were even people in media who were saying that Lomachenko could beat Pretty Boy Floyd Mayweather, which to me sounds like an insult and it sounds laughable because this is what
Well, Lomachenko at the time was regarded as one of the greatest talents of all time, and at the time, it seemed a little bit believable. But that's why, once again, it's very important to pump the brakes on certain fighters that have not necessarily proved themselves quite as much overall as that of past fighters. And that's why when we talk about certain fighters like a Lomachenko, or Naiwe Inoue, or Terrence Bud Crawford, or a Jamel Charlo, or that of a Steve Fulton, we have to be very careful with overall who we compare them with, because you can't compare them with certain fighters that have already accomplished a hell of a lot more in their career, because time changes overall a lot of the times within a blink of an eye. Something can change within the sport of boxing or a sport in general overall in a very, very short amount of time.
media does. They pick their favorites and they're insanely biased against other fighters and towards those favorites. And at the end of the day, if you disagree, then they'll say you're hating on the fighter. But then
Well, I would somewhat agree with you, Mr. Boxing Eagle, but you're pretty much the exact same. Once again, all these guys from the LDBC and new media, they're like ESPN. This is why you can't trust these guys because they're just completely biased and the pound for pound list. They just love the guys that they love, and they're not logical and objective, right? But if those guys are not logical and not objective, then what the hell does that make you? Once again, all new media is basically ESPN and Ring Magazine. All they're for is just Black American fighters. That's all it's for.
As time goes on, you start to see that they overhyped the fighter, that they overstated the fighter's ability. And now you see it with old media and Vasyl Lomachenko and other fighters like Gennady Golovkin. They build Triple G up. Hey, no, guys, and Max, guys. They build these guys up and say X, Y, and Z, and Loma's the GOAT and can beat Pretty Boy Floyd Mayweather. And then when the performances regress, then they jump off the bandwagon. And now you see everybody, it looks like very little people.
Well, of course, because that's what fanboys do, and that's the exact same that's the exact same thing that you do. That's exactly what new media did with Deontay Wilder. They claimed overall that Deontay Wilder that he was a top five pound for pound fighter, and that oh my God, look, he has the same amount of title defenses against as Muhammad Ali, and he's gonna knock out Tyson Fury in 6 rounds. You'll see when it comes down to it, he's the best heavyweight of this generation. And now all of a sudden, now that Tyson Fury is the best heavyweight of the generation, they say that Deontay Wilder's trash because they don't want to give Tyson Fury that credit. But that's how fans work.
Have faith that Lomachenko can beat Devin Haney. But years ago, when Lomachenko was a champion and Devin Haney kept calling him out, Devin Haney was only 20 years old. And my channel, I was saying that Lomachenko should have fought Devin. And he actually had a better chance fighting an inexperienced Devin when he was younger. Maybe he had more time to.
Well, I agree with that, but that's the exact reason why Lomachenko at least stated that at the time he didn't want to face him. Now, whether that's the 100% reason why and not, who knows? But that's the reason why overall I was stating that I would like to see Devin Haney get a little bit more experience because they basically would have not gave Lomachenko any credit for defeating a Devin Haney. They would have just said, "Oh, well, you beat a guy that clearly was inexperienced." Basically, the same shit that they say with Lomachenko beating that of a Gary Russell Jr. So they know damn well that that he would have not gotten a great amount of credit anyway because Mr. Ego basically just told you what it is.
Add size and things like that and gain experience. Now it's looking like Devin Haney will beat Lomachenko, and most people are kind of betting like that outside of Paulie Malignaggi and maybe a few other people. So to me, it's just funny how this all works out. People.
And I respect Paulie Malignaggi as a commentator. When it comes down to it, I think that Paulie usually has a lot of logical and very great analytical things to say. But it's very obvious that he has a personal agenda against Devin Haney. He does not like Devin Haney, more than likely because the he never will let a white boy beat him comment. Whatever it is, whatever the hell it is. Listen, in my opinion, and it's not that I don't like Lomachenko. I think that he's once again a decently great fighter. I do not see him beating Devin Haney. I think Devin Haney is way too big. I think that Devin Haney has enough talent and skills to beat Lomachenko combined with the size. With the fighter all in all that usually is going to be that much bigger in terms of the size advantage, the only way that a fighter in terms of Lomachenko's stature is going to beat that fighter is clearly all in all if they're a little bit inexperienced or in terms of if they're not necessarily an A-plus fighter. Now, I don't think that Devin Haney is necessarily A-plus in terms of the skill set, but I think he's at least around the A- to A grade level. And on top of that, he's coming in with a great amount of momentum and a great amount of confidence. I just don't see Lomachenko beating him.
They said Lomachenko is better than Floyd Mayweather and all this crazy stuff. He can beat Manny Pacquiao. All these things compared him to people in history and said I've seen people say Lomachenko could beat Sugar Shane Mosley, and it seems like now everyone, all those people.
Sugar Shane Mosley is another example that you could debate as a decently great fighter. Now, I would say that he's maybe slightly ahead of that, but you could debate that because if we're really going to be real about Sugar Shane Mosley lost a lot of the bigger fights in his career as well. But that really gets pushed under the rug by the LDBC and new media because Sugar Shane Mosley, of course, is a black American fighter. He's protected by them.
Just mysteriously vanished and dropped off the face of the earth and dissipated and disappeared into the abyss. And they're leaving Lomachenko because they're seeing that he's getting touched up in his recent fights.
Once again, of course, because that's how fans work. Before, once again, when Deontay Wilder was undefeated, he could beat Mike Tyson and, he was getting up there with any heavyweight in history. Now, all of a sudden, overall, that he lost to Tyson Fury, got his ass whooped. Now, all of a sudden, they're starting to see overall, okay, well, maybe we can't get away with saying these things anymore. That's just how fans work. That's how a lot of fan bases work. It's nothing new. You see it in the tennis world a lot of the times as well. Certain Rafael Nadal fans, whenever Novak Djokovic wins another Grand Slam, and if he's leading the race or if he's tied with them, before he was tied with them, it was all about the Grand Slam race and who has the most Grand Slams. But as soon as Djokovic wins the most amount of Grand Slams, oh, he plays in the weakest era and he only beat Nadal and Federer when they were old and all sort of bullshit when it comes down to it. Listen, fan bases are just like that. But that's why you're not supposed to be at least super duper fanatical about any particular individual or anything overall if you're going to be a logical and objective analyzer, because it's going to ruin overall your analyzation skills.
And that's kind of what Jermaine Ortiz is saying. He's saying, hey, I controlled him with the jab. And, Jermaine Ortiz and others, they're saying that Lomachenko's too small. To me, that's cap. It has nothing to do with him being too small because Floyd Mayweather.
I don't really think that is cap at all. I think that it's a part of it. I think overall that you're lying to yourself if you're saying that the size overall is not a part of it. Now, if you want to say that that isn't the whole thing when it comes down to that would be, okay to say, especially if, people before were claiming that he's on the same level as Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao and some of these other guys. You can claim all in all that, well, if you guys are claiming that or you guys have claimed that before, then why is all of a sudden the size, that's big of an issue? But once again, for those of us that look at things realistically, it's very clear that Lomachenko is not a natural 135 pounder. And he may even debatably not even be a natural 130 pounder. It just is what it is. It's very obvious that Devin Haney is decently bigger than Lomachenko. I don't think that that's really that big of an excuse. I just think that it's a factor.
If we're being honest, he's too small. I mean, compare Jerron Boots Ennis to Floyd Mayweather size-wise. Mayweather, even at this age, 45 or whatever, he's going to look a lot smaller than Jerron Boots Ennis. So Mayweather wasn't the biggest welterweight by any stretch. He survived off his ring IQ and his ability, and he evolved his style. So, other thing is, Lomachenko fought in the World of Boxing series, and he fought before he turned pro, and he was over 130 pounds, like 131, 133 pounds. So he already was fighting at the higher weight. But what Top Rank does a lot of times is they'll have guys start like Shakur Stevenson, and he's probably draining himself to make featherweight. And you see how big Shakur is, and he's moving up to 135, and he's rapidly moving through the weight classes because he probably didn't even need to be at featherweight for real. But
And I agree with that, and I've been stating that about a lot of fighters. Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney, they're not natural 135 pounders, they're 140 pounders. That's the exact same thing that happened with Oscar De La Hoya at the beginning of his career, with Floyd Mayweather Jr., excuse me, and a certain amount of other fighters overall throughout their career. Bernard Hopkins, when it came down to it, a lot of those guys were not naturally a middleweight or naturally overall 135 pounder. When you take a look at Oscar De La Hoya versus Chavez, if you take a look at that fight, Oscar looks about 2 weight classes bigger than Chavez. He looks about 2 weight classes bigger. They don't even look like they belong in the same ring with each other. That happens with a lot of fighters. And that's why I say you get to really see how truly great a fighter actually is once they start getting in the ring with fighters that are about their own same size. And that's why I said it's going to be very interesting to see with Teofimo Lopez what he does with certain fighters that are going to be his own same size. Because right now he appears overall to not be handling it super duper well. But with Lomachenko, one thing I'll at least say is this. With his second loss of his career against Teofimo, and if he does lose to Devin Haney, those fighters clearly would be decently bigger than him. I don't think there's any debate about that.
He's young, his body was able to do it, and then your body's more pliable. Same thing with Lomachenko. When Loma was at 126, he looked way bigger than most of his opponents at 126. And
I'm not really sure overall if I can necessarily agree with that. Because when Lomachenko was fighting guys like an Orlando Solito or certain guys all in all that he was fighting in the early part, even a Roman, Roman Rocky Martinez, he looked about the same size as those guys. He was just completely out of this world in terms of the skill set compared to those other fighters, at least usually. Of course, he had a little bit of a blunder in the early part of his career against Orlando Salido, but the rest of his fights down there was no other fighters that could even stand a chance. He pretty much also was the same size as Nicholas Walters. Now, the only fighter that I remember being decently smaller than Lomachenko that he fought during that little run that he had of the few years was Guillermo Rigondeaux. But besides that, all those fighters at 126, even 130, they were about his own same size. But 135, these fighters are clearly bigger than him. I don't think that there's any doubt about it. But, ego once again. He doesn't like Lomachenko that much. And overall, he is on the side of hoping that Lomachenko gets quote unquote exposed. So once again, he's going to be claiming overall because from his fan perspective or his perspective when it comes down to it, Lomachenko overall, it's basically an excuse that, he's not big enough for 135. I don't think that's really an excuse at all. I think it's very clear that he's not a natural 135 pounder. But once again, if you're one of these guys that claimed that Lomachenko was on the Mayweather level and on the Pacquiao level, then overall it really shouldn't be as much of an excuse as what some people are putting out there.
Didn't look remotely close. And when Loma's fighting Rigondeaux looked tiny, things like that.
Yes, but Rigondeaux was not a natural 126 or natural 130 pounder. And if you know anything about boxing, you know that.
And at the end of it, Lomachenko was looking huge. And then now that he's at 135 and the challenges are getting tougher, and he's finally faced a division where Loma has to fight guys that are bigger than him and have some power, more durable. Lomachenko's definitely not looking the same, and he doesn't have.
Well, I thought you just said all in all that that was an excuse. So why all of a sudden are you saying that these fighters are bigger than him? That doesn't make any sense. Now, I think what Ego is trying to say is that they're not big enough all in all to the point to where it should be that much of an excuse. Well, it depends against who the fighter is. If you're talking about a George Kambosos or an Isaac Pitbull Cruz, then no, it can't really be used that much as an excuse because those guys are only about one weight class bigger than Lomachenko. But if you're talking about Devin Haney and Teofimo Lopez, then it does have to be used a little bit, at least overall somewhat, because those guys are about two weight classes bigger than him.
He doesn't have it to get through these fights clearly. Teofimo Lopez and Jermaine Ortiz fight. So that's a bad look for Lomachenko because old media told you he was pound for pound really high up, and they didn't want to remove him.
Well, at the time, he was the number one pound for pound fighter. And you can accept that, you can not accept that. But at the time, Lomachenko was running through certain fighters that were classified as A-grade fighters. Nicholas Walters, Guillermo Rigondeaux, Gary Russell Jr., even Jorge Linares, debatably. He ran through all those guys. He mainly embarrassed all those guys. And it finally took his jump up to 135 for him to finally overall not really look as dominant as what he once did.
Him off the pound for pound list. So they wanted to keep Lomachenko on, but they don't want to put guys like Jermell Charlo on. And he's undisputed right now. Lomachenko has no.
Well, Jermell Charlo, in my opinion, would be above Lomachenko on the pound for pound list, but it's not by much. And I've already said this once again about Jermell Charlo. For a guy on the know that just recently got the only A-grade win of his career, and recently, not too long ago, lost to a debatable C-grade fighter in Tony Harrison, a guy that was knocked out 3 times, I believe, before Jermell Charlo even fought him. A lot of people sure advocate for him being a top 5 pound for pound fighter.
Belts.
I can guarantee you that if Jermell Charlo, that if he was a Caucasoid fighter, none of these guys from the LDBC or New Media, or if he was a Latino fighter, none of these guys would be advocating him to be a top 5 pound per pound fighter. None of them.
They don't want to put Shakur Stevenson on. They don't want to put undisputed Devin Haney on, but they wanted to leave Lomachenko on the pound for pound list. Now people are making a million excuses. Oh, Loma's too small. Oh, he's getting older, and all these reasons why he's.
Well, I do potentially agree with that. If you have Vasyl Lomachenko on the top 10 pound per pound list right now, above that of a Devin Haney, if you think that he is that skilled to where he has no belts at the current moment in time, but still deserves to be on the top 10 pound per pound list, then he should beat Devin Haney.
But to me, he looks like the same Lomachenko he's always looked like. When he was fighting Jose Pedraza, his face after that fight, his face after the.
Well, I think that Lomachenko is showing some of the same faults that I've seen at 135. But do I think that it's completely out of pocket to say that maybe he's slowing down a little bit? No, not necessarily, because once again, he's turning 35, early on next year. He's getting older as a fighter, and his type of style, once again, it's not meant to go long term. So I don't think that is completely out of pocket. But once again, ego is not in favor of Lomachenko. Now, if Lomachenko was a Black American fighter for the PBC, then he'd be all for those. But it is what it is. But like I said, that's why everyone has their own perspective, and that's why, it's almost impossible, even for those of us to try to be as most logical and objective as possible. You're all going to have your certain bias because we all have our own perspectives, depending on what demographic you are, what age range you are, what overall generation you come from, and what experience you may have.
Miguel Mariaga fight. I think that fight he said I need to work on my defense. His face has always looked like that. He was gun shy with Tio for 6 rounds. So to me, it's just the same Lomachenko. To me, it looks like people are making excuses now because they think Devin Haney's going to beat him. Let me know what you guys think of Jermaine.
I think that that's somewhat overall the truth, but what I will say is this: is there a little bit of validity to saying that he clearly is smaller than Devin Haney, and he also may be getting a little bit older? Yes, but there also is some validity to what Mr. Ego was saying in this video. Because is it true also that Vasyl Lomachenko, that he was in his prime when he fought Tio, and that he completely shit the bed in that fight? Yes, it's 100% true. No doubt about it. He should have had a much better performance, the level that people were putting him on, if overall he truly was on the level that some people were trying to allege that he was. So it is what it is, at least when you talk about the Mayweather / Manny Pacquiao level. But anyway.
Ortiz's interview. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Let me know how I did in this video. And I'm out.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. I just thought that'd be very particularly interesting. I am very interested in this fight. I do overall hope that it happens. Do I believe that Lomachenko will beat Devin Haney? No. I don't think overall that he's going to put on the pressure enough. I don't think that he's going to put on the pace enough. And I think that Devin Haney, I think overall that he's going to be way too active in the fight. I think that Lomachenko more than likely is going to give him a decent fight in certain rounds. But I think more than likely that Devin Haney is probably going to beat him about 8 rounds to 4. Wouldn't shock me even if it was about 9 rounds to 3. Wouldn't shock me either if it was a 7 rounds to 5 fight that could go either way. But I just think that Lomachenko, with his pace, is he really overall going to have the ability, or is he really going to have the know-it-all to say, you know what, I can't really afford to give up as many rounds as what I did in those other 2 fights. I'm going to have to really push the pace in this one. I'm going to have to overall pretty much go balls to the wall, or I'm really overall going to have to be full-on pace mode in this fight, at least 9 or 8 out of the, 12 rounds in this fight. Is he going to be able to do that? I'm not so sure. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's really about it for this fight. Or excuse me, that's really about it for this video. I just thought that that'd be very particularly interesting. But anyways, that's really about it. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.